Look at this old, fat cow crawling around on the floor. The words slice through the golden silence of the Dolby Theater like a rusty blade, each syllable dripping with contempt as I kneel on the crimson carpet, my trembling hands desperately trying to gather the crystal fragments scattered around me like broken dreams. Dom Perignon, worth more than my weekly paycheck, soaks through my black polyester stockings. The expensive liquid mixing, with my tears of humiliation as Brandon Mitchell's voice, carries with theatrical precision through Hollywood's most sacred space. I had been balancing the heavy, silver tray with practiced grace, navigating through the maze of designer gowns and perfectly pressed tuxedos toward Table 12, where industry titans discussed multi-million-dollar deals over champagne that cost more than my monthly rent. The weight of the tray cut into my palms through my white cotton gloves, but I'd grown accustomed to such discomfort over my 6 years working these glittering events for Beverly Hills Catering Company. Tonight was the Academy Awards, the pinnacle of Hollywood glamour, and every server had been briefed multiple times on the importance of perfection, invisibility, seamless service. At 38, I had mastered the art of moving like a shadow between tables where conversations worth millions of dollars happened over appetizers that represented more money than I saw in months. My black uniform, pressed to crisp perfection despite being purchased secondhand from a uniform supply store in East LA, bore my small name tag, Sarah Chen, in modest silver letters that no guest had ever bothered to read. I was furniture with legs, a necessity that facilitated their evening but remained beneath notice, beneath consideration, beneath basic human courtesy. But tonight felt different from the moment I'd walked through the service entrance 6 hours earlier. Maybe it was the electric energy crackling through the air, or maybe it was the crushing weight of knowing that every dollar I earned tonight would go directly toward my mother's experimental multiple sclerosis treatments that our insurance had deemed non-essential despite her rapidly declining condition. Each tremor in her once steady hands, each stumble as she navigated our small apartment with increasing difficulty, reminded me why I swallowed my pride night after night to serve people who looked through me as if I were transparent. The experimental therapy offered hope, real, tangible hope that we could slow the progression of her disease, maybe even reverse some of the damage. But at $8,000 per month, it might as well have been on the moon. So I worked every available event, swallowed every insult, endured every moment of invisibility, because love makes you brave in ways you never imagined possible. The Dolby Theater hummed with anticipation as Hollywood's elite settled into their seats for the night's ceremony. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across marble floors, polished to mirror brightness, while the scent of $1,000 perfumes mingled with the fragrance of orchids flown in from Thailand specifically for tonight's event. Outside, thousands of fans pressed against velvet ropes, their camera flashes creating a constellation of hope and desperation against the darkening Los Angeles sky. Table 12 held particular significance tonight. It was positioned in the premium section near the stage, reserved for A-list celebrities and industry power brokers whose decisions could make or break careers with a single phone call. As I approached with my tray of Dom Perignon Vintage 2008, I recognized the faces from countless magazine covers and movie screens. The woman in the emerald Versace gown worth more than my annual salary was complaining to her companion about her personal trainer's scheduling conflicts, while the man beside her, a director whose name appeared on 3 Oscar nominations this year, scrolled through his iPhone with the bored indifference of someone accustomed to being the center of attention. "Excuse me?" I said softly, my voice barely audible above the orchestra's warm-up notes as I began distributing the crystal flutes. The champagne caught the light from the chandeliers, creating tiny rainbows in each glass that reminded me of the prisms my mother used to hang in our kitchen window when I was small, back when she still had the coordination to perform such delicate tasks. Neither guest acknowledged my presence. They continued their conversation about a project in development, their voices carrying the casual confidence of people who had never worried about rent money or medical bills, or whether they'd have enough gas to drive home after a long shift. I moved efficiently around the table, placing each glass with practiced precision, my movements honed by years of experience, serving people who treated me like an extension of the furniture. The theater's lighting began its subtle shift, signaling that the ceremony would begin soon. The energy in the room intensified as anticipation built among the audience of entertainment industry elite. I had 3 more glasses to place when fate decided to intervene in the cruelest possible way. My right heel, part of the mandatory black pumps that all female servers were required to wear, purchased from a discount shoe store because my catering company didn't provide uniforms beyond the basic shirt and pants, caught on something unexpected. Later, I would realize it was an Italian leather Hermes purse strap, carelessly dropped beside a chair by someone whose handbag cost more than I made in 3 months. But in that moment, all I knew was the horrifying sensation of my balance giving way. Time fractured into slow motion, each second stretching like taffy as I felt gravity claim victory over my desperately flailing arms. The silver tray tilted at an impossible angle, and I watched in absolute horror as 6 crystal glasses of Dom Perignon began their inevitable descent toward the pristine red carpet. My mind, trained by years of catering disasters, frantically calculated the cost. The glasses alone were probably worth $500 each, the champagne another $2,000. Not to mention the potential damage to the custom-woven carpet that probably cost more than my car. The crash echoed through the suddenly silent auditorium like a gunshot in a cathedral. Every conversation stopped mid-sentence. Every head turned with synchronized precision. 1,000 pairs of eyes, enhanced by Hollywood's most expensive makeup artists and framed by designer eyewear worth more than my monthly salary, focused with laser intensity on my mortified figure sprawled among the wreckage of my dignity. The Dom Perignon spread across the crimson carpet in an expanding stain that seemed to grow larger with each panicked heartbeat. Crystal fragments scattered like deadly diamonds under the brilliant chandeliers, catching and throwing back light in sharp, accusatory flashes that seemed to announce my failure to everyone in the theater. The silence was absolutely crushing. No rustle of expensive fabric, no gentle clink of jewelry, no whispered conversations. Even the orchestra had stopped their tuning, leaving me alone in this terrible, perfect quiet. My knees hit the soaked carpet without conscious thought, the champagne immediately seeping through my stockings with cold, sticky fingers. My hands shook so violently I could barely grasp the larger pieces of glass, each shard seeming to mock my clumsiness as I scrambled to contain the disaster I had created. Tears blurred my vision, but I kept my head down, desperately praying to any deity that might be listening that this moment would pass quickly, that these important people would return to their important conversations and forget about the clumsy waitress who had dared to disrupt their perfect evening. But the universe, it seemed, had other plans for me. The laugh started low and testing, like a predator testing the air for weakness. Then it grew into something else entirely. A full-throated theatrical guffaw that cut through the silence with the precision of a professionally sharpened blade. My blood turned to ice water in my veins as I recognized the voice even before I lifted my tear-streaked face to confirm my worst fears. Brandon Mitchell, 3-time Oscar nominee, action movie king, and owner of a smile that had graced magazine covers around the world. He stood at table 8 like a gladiator in the Colosseum, his 6'2" frame imposing in a custom Armani tuxedo that probably cost more than I would make in a year. His perfect teeth gleamed under the crystal chandeliers as he pointed directly at me with a manicured finger, treating my humiliation like entertainment specifically arranged for his amusement. Maybe if she spent less time at the buffet and more time watching where she's going, he continued, his voice growing stronger and more confident with each cruel word. She wouldn't be making such a disaster out of what's supposed to be a classy event. The words slammed into me like physical blows, each syllable designed for maximum impact and crystal clear delivery to every corner of the acoustically perfect theater. Old, fat, cow. The terms echoed in my head with the persistence of a broken record, drilling into every insecurity I had ever harbored about my appearance, my worth, my right to exist in the same space as these beautiful, successful, important people. A production assistant appeared beside me like an angel of mercy, her young face kind and sympathetic as she knelt with towels and a small dustpan. But I couldn't meet her eyes, couldn't look at anyone's face, couldn't bear to see the mixture of pity, embarrassment, and contempt that I was certain must be written across every expression in the theater. The weight of their collective stare pressed down on me like a physical force, making it difficult to breathe, difficult to think, difficult to remember that just 5 minutes earlier I had been a person with dignity and purpose instead of a punchline in Brandon Mitchell's impromptu comedy routine. Each shard of glass I picked up seemed to cut into my dignity as much as my fingers. The champagne stain continued to spread across the expensive carpet like my humiliation seeping into the sacred ground where dreams were celebrated and careers were made. I wanted nothing more than to disappear, to dissolve into the fabric and never have to face another human being again, never have to carry the memory of this moment for the rest of my life. But Brandon wasn't finished with his performance. He had found his rhythm now, the natural showman in him recognizing an audience primed for entertainment and ready to laugh at someone else's expense. The power rush of having a captive audience hanging on his every word was clearly intoxicating, and he rode that wave with the skill of someone who had spent his entire adult life being the center of attention. "I mean, seriously," he said, gesturing broadly toward me with the dramatic flair that had made him millions at the box office. "Who hires these people? Don't they have standards anymore? This is the fucking Oscars. Not some dive bar in Nebraska where you might expect this kind of amateur hour bullshit." Nervous laughter rippled through sections of the crowd, uncomfortable, chuckles from people who weren't quite sure if they should be amused or appalled, but were too intimidated by Brandon's star power to object to his cruelty. Most of the audience looked away, suddenly fascinated by their phones or the elaborate floral arrangements that had been positioned throughout the theater. But Brandon's table erupted in enthusiastic, sycophantic laughter, his companions desperate to curry favor with a man whose recommendation could launch careers or whose disapproval could end them. Each laugh felt like nails on a chalkboard, scraping against my exposed nerves and reinforcing every negative thought I had ever harbored about myself. The sound seemed to amplify and echo in the perfect acoustics of the theater, creating a symphony of cruelty that would replay in my nightmares for months to come. "Next time," Brandon called out as I struggled to my feet on legs that felt like they might give out at any moment. "Maybe try serving salads instead of champagne. Might do you some good, you know." The final burst of laughter from his table followed me like a pack of hunting dogs as I stumbled toward the service entrance. My vision completely blurred by tears, I absolutely refused to let fall in front of these people. Behind me, I could hear the orchestra gradually resuming their warm-up, conversations slowly returning to their normal volume and intensity, and the show preparing to continue as it always did. The red carpet would be cleaned, the stain removed by professional restoration experts, and by tomorrow morning's entertainment news cycle, everyone would have forgotten about the clumsy waitress who had dared to disrupt their perfect evening, everyone except me. I would carry this moment forever. The service corridor felt like a sanctuary after the harsh lights and crueler spotlights of the main theater. Here, surrounded by catering equipment and industrial cleaning supplies, I finally allowed myself to break completely. Great heaving sobs erupted from somewhere deep in my chest. Years of accumulated pain and rejection pouring out in this sterile hallway lined with forgotten dreams and discarded dignity. The concrete floor was cold against my back as I slid down the wall, my expensive black uniform now stained with champagne, tears, and the bitter taste of failure. The fabric clung to my skin uncomfortably, a reminder of how hard I had worked to look professional, to blend in, to be worthy of serving these important people who had just watched me get publicly destroyed for their entertainment. This is where Marcus Rodriguez found me 20 minutes later, slumped in a corner like a broken doll, mascara creating dark rivers down my cheeks, and the echo of Brandon Mitchell's laughter still ringing in my ears like tinnitus. Marcus had been head server for Beverly Hills Catering for 15 years, a dignified man in his mid-50s who treated his staff with the respect and consideration that our clients rarely bothered to show. He didn't say anything at first, just settled his considerable frame down beside me on the cold floor and handed me a clean white towel from his supply kit. His presence was a small anchor in my storm of humiliation, solid and comforting in a way that reminded me that not everyone in the world was cruel, that some people still understood basic human decency. 30 years I've been doing this kind of work, he finally said, his voice soft with the hard-earned wisdom that comes from decades of serving people who have more money than empathy. I've seen every kind of cruelty you can imagine. Rich people think money makes them better than everyone else, but all it really does is make them louder when they decide to show you who they really are underneath all that polish. I wiped my face with the towel, the soft cotton-absorbing tears and makeup in equal measure as I tried to compose myself enough to form coherent words. I can't go back in there, Marcus. I can't face them again. I can't pretend this didn't happen. That I didn't just get humiliated in front of 1,000 people who will probably be posting about it on social media before the ceremony even ends. You don't have to go back, he replied without hesitation. His voice carrying the authority of someone who had navigated these waters long enough to know which battles were worth fighting. I'm sending you home right now. Full pay for the entire event, and don't let me hear any arguments about it. You've worked harder than anyone on my team for 6 years, and you don't deserve what just happened to you, he paused, studying my face with the careful attention of someone who had learned to read people's pain in their expressions. Their posture, the way they held their hands when they thought no one was watching. And Sarah? I looked up at him through swollen, exhausted eyes that felt like they had aged a decade in the past half hour. What happened in there says absolutely nothing about you and everything about him. Don't let one privileged asshole with a pretty face and a movie career convince you that you're anything less than worthy of basic human respect. You're worth 10 of him, and anyone with half a brain can see that. But as I drove home through the empty Los Angeles streets an hour later, Brandon Mitchell's words played on repeat in my mind like a damaged recording that couldn't be turned off. Old fat cow, old fat cow. The syllables seemed to synchronize with the rhythm of my windshield wipers as a light rain began to fall, each repetition driving the humiliation deeper into my consciousness. The city lights blurred through my tears as I navigated familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Somewhere in the hills above me, Brandon Mitchell was probably already back to enjoying his evening, accepting congratulations and compliments from people desperate to bask in his reflected glory. To him, I was already forgotten, a momentary source of amusement that had served its purpose and could now be discarded like the champagne-soaked towels that were probably already in a dumpster behind the theater. My phone buzzed against the passenger seat with a text message from my mother. How was work tonight, sweetheart? Hope the fancy people were nice to you, and you had a chance to see some beautiful dresses. Love you. I stared at the message for a long time while sitting at a red light, the screen blurring through fresh tears as I contemplated how to respond. How could I tell this woman, who had raised me alone after my father's death, who had worked double shifts as a nurse to put me through community college, who had never once made me feel like a burden even as her own body began failing her, that her daughter had just been publicly humiliated in front of Hollywood's elite? How could I explain that the money she was counting on for her next treatment might not materialize because her daughter was apparently too clumsy and pathetic to carry champagne across a room without destroying everything? Finally, I typed back, "It was fine, Mom. Just another night serving the stars." Sleep well. Some lies, I reasoned, were kinder than the truth, at least for tonight. If this story already touched you, subscribe to our channel and leave your like so you don't miss any of our stories. The video was everywhere by sunrise. I discovered this devastating fact while sitting at my small kitchen table the next morning, still wearing my bathrobe at noon and nursing my third cup of coffee while staring at my phone screen in complete disbelief. Someone with a smartphone, probably multiple someones, given the different angles I was seeing, had captured every excruciating second of my humiliation and uploaded it to every social media platform imaginable. The most popular version, posted to TikTok by an account called iOscars Insider, had already been viewed over 2 million times in less than 12 hours. The caption read, "Oscar winner Brandon Mitchell shows his true colors, publicly humiliates working woman at Academy Awards. The video quality was crystal clear, capturing every detail of my fall, every scattered piece of glass, every word of Brandon's theatrical cruelty, and worst of all, every second of my desperate scramble to clean up the mess while tears streamed down my face. The comments section had become a digital coliseum where strangers fought over my dignity, while I sat in my apartment watching my worst moment become entertainment for millions of people I would never meet. The cruel responses cut deep. She should have been more careful. These events cost millions to put on. Maybe he was just being honest about what everyone was thinking. Personal responsibility, people. Actions have consequences. But scattered among the cruelty were voices of support that made my chest tight with unexpected emotion and reminded me that humanity still existed somewhere in the digital wilderness. This is absolutely disgusting. No one deserves to be treated this way, regardless of their job. I will never watch another Brandon Mitchell movie after seeing this. We see you, Sarah Chen, and you deserve so much better than this treatment. They knew my name. Somehow, through the magic of internet detective work, someone had identified me within hours of the video going viral. Now my full name was trending alongside hashtags like Brandon Mitchell is trash, Oscar disgrace, and justice for Sarah Chen. My phone had been buzzing incessantly since 5 a.m. with calls from unknown numbers, reporters. I quickly realized wanting exclusive interviews, personal statements, my side of the story, anything that might feed the growing media frenzy. I had turned off my phone after the first dozen calls, but the notifications kept accumulating like digital snow. Text messages from old high school acquaintances I hadn't spoken to in years, friend requests from complete strangers, and increasingly aggressive voicemails from entertainment journalists who seemed to think my trauma was their ticket to a viral story. The world, it seemed, would not let me hide from what had happened. The private humiliation I had hoped to process quietly in the safety of my own home had become public property, dissected and analyzed by millions of strangers who felt entitled to opinions about my life, my appearance, my worth as a human being. By Wednesday afternoon, major news outlets had picked up the story. Entertainment Tonight ran a 5-minute segment titled Oscar Night Outrage, Celebrity Cruelty Caught on Camera. The Today Show mentioned it during their entertainment roundup, with the host shaking her head in disapproval while showing clips of the incident. Late-night talk show hosts began incorporating jokes into their monologues, most targeting Brandon's behavior, but some still finding ways to make my weight and appearance part of their comedy routines. I had become a symbol overnight, transformed from invisible service worker to viral sensation. From private person to public talking point, I was no longer Sarah Chen, woman trying to pay for her mother's medical treatments. I was a hashtag, a meme, a cautionary tale, everything except what I had always been, just a human being trying to get by in an increasingly difficult world. The phone call I had been dreading came Thursday morning while I was attempting to eat breakfast, though my stomach had been in knots for days and food felt like ash in my mouth. Mrs. Rodriguez's voice was strained and apologetic, but I could hear the resignation underneath her professional tone before she even began to deliver the news I already knew was coming. Sarah, Mija, I'm so very sorry, but we've been getting calls from clients since Tuesday morning. Some of our biggest accounts are threatening to cancel their contracts if you're assigned to any of their future events. The Weinstein wedding next month, the tech company launch party, the charity gala at the Beverly Hills Hotel, they're all specifically requesting that you not be part of the serving staff. Mrs. Rodriguez had been my employer for 6 years, a kind woman who had built her catering business from nothing and who genuinely cared about her employees' well-being. I could hear the genuine pain in her voice as she continued. I have 12 other people depending on me for their livelihoods, Sarah. Rent payments and car loans and children who need school supplies. I can't afford to lose these contracts, not in this economy. You understand, don't you? I understood perfectly. I was being fired, not officially, because that might open the company to lawsuits, but effectively and permanently. The woman who had worked every holiday for 6 years, who had never called in sick, who had handled impossible clients and impossible demands with grace and professionalism, was suddenly unemployable because someone with more money and fame had decided to destroy me for sport on national television. "I understand. Mrs. Rodriguez," I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow and strange to my own ears. "Thank you for everything. You've been a good employer." After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen staring at the bills spread across the table. Rent due in 2 weeks. My mother's next therapy session scheduled for Monday. Credit card payments that were already stretching my budget, even with steady work. The financial reality of my new situation hit me like a physical blow. How was I going to pay for Mom's treatments now? How was I going to keep my apartment? How was I going to survive when I had become too toxic for anyone to hire? That afternoon, desperate for fresh air and perspective, I walked through Griffith Park trying to clear my head and figure out my next move. Los Angeles stretched out below me in all directions, a sprawling testament to dreams achieved and destroyed in equal measure. Somewhere in those hills lived Brandon Mitchell, probably completely unaware that his 30 seconds of casual cruelty had cost an innocent woman her livelihood. To him, I was already ancient history, a momentary source of entertainment that had served its purpose and been forgotten. But I wasn't forgotten by everyone. When I finally turned my phone back on that evening, I found my voicemail box completely full and dozens of text messages from strangers offering support, encouragement, and sometimes help. A woman in Ohio wrote about her daughter's struggles with weight-based bullying and how seeing people defend me had given them both hope. A man in Texas shared his own story of workplace humiliation and how he understood the particular pain of being publicly shamed. A teenager in Florida said the video had made her cry, but that watching people stand up for me had restored her faith in humanity. Among these messages of support was one that stood out for its thoughtful tone and respectful approach. It was from Elena Vasquez, a documentary filmmaker whose work I had admired from afar for years. Her films were thoughtful, nuanced pieces about ordinary people facing extraordinary challenges. She didn't sensationalize or exploit. She illuminated and honored her subjects' experiences. "Dear Sarah," the message read, "My name is Elena Vasquez, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. I've been following your story since the video went viral, and I'm deeply sorry for what you've experienced. I think your story deserves to be told with dignity and respect, and I think you deserve better than what happened to you. I would very much like to meet with you to discuss the possibility of creating a film about your experience, not as exploitation, but as a way to explore larger issues of workplace dignity and how we treat the people who serve us. There's no pressure at all, but if you're interested in talking, I'll be at Earth Cafe in Beverly Hills tomorrow at 2 p.m. Please know that whatever you decide, you have my respect and support." I read the message 3 times, my heart racing with a mixture of fear and possibility. The last thing I wanted was more attention, more cameras, more opportunities for the world to judge and dissect every aspect of my life. But there was something about Elena's respectful tone, the dignity in her words, that made me hesitate before deleting the message. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible. Maybe it was time to take control of my own narrative instead of letting Brandon Mitchell and his supporters write the ending to my story. That evening, I called my mother for the first time since the incident. I had been avoiding her calls, unable to face telling her what had really happened, but I knew she would have seen the news by now. Mrs. Patterson, her elderly neighbor, was an avid social media user and would have undoubtedly shown her the video. "Oh, Mija," my mother said as soon as she heard my voice. The endearment she had used since I was small, carrying all the love and pain that words couldn't express. I saw it. Mrs. Patterson showed me on her computer. "How are you holding up?" The simple question broke down all my carefully constructed walls, and I found myself sobbing into the phone like a child who had scraped her knee and needed her mother's comfort. "I lost my job, Mom. They fired me because I'm too embarrassing to have around important people. How am I going to pay for your treatments? How am I going to pay rent? What am I going to do?" "Listen to me, Sarah," my mother said, her voice growing stronger despite the tremor that multiple sclerosis had introduced to her speech. "You are not defined by what some cruel man said about you on the worst night of your life. You are defined by how you choose to respond to that cruelty. Your father always used to say that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you opens the door to the best thing that could happen to you. But you have to be brave enough to walk through that door when it appears. What if I'm not brave enough? I whispered into the phone, my voice small and scared in a way I hadn't allowed myself to feel since childhood. Then you fake it until you are, she replied, with the same gentle firmness she had used to encourage me through childhood fears and teenage heartbreaks. That's what real courage is, sweetheart. Not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite that fear. Not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let that pain define your future. We talked for another hour about practical matters, her upcoming medical appointments, the possibility of me moving in with her temporarily to save money, her surprisingly robust savings account that she had been hiding from me to ensure I wouldn't sacrifice my own future for her care. By the time I hung up, I felt something I hadn't experienced in days: hope. Later that night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and listening to the distant sounds of Los Angeles traffic, I thought about Elena's message and her invitation to meet. Brandon Mitchell's words still echoed in my head, but they were quieter now, competing with other voices: my mother's unwavering faith in my worth, the strangers who had defended me online, Elena's respectful offer to help me tell my own story, and slowly, tentatively, my own voice beginning to emerge from beneath the layers of shame and humiliation. Maybe it was time to stop letting other people define who I was. Maybe it was time to stand up and be seen, not as Brandon Mitchell's victim, but as Sarah Chen, a woman with her own story to tell and her own power to reclaim. The decision scared me more than anything I had ever contemplated, but as I finally drifted off to sleep, I realized that the alternative, remaining forever defined by 30 seconds of someone else's cruelty, scared me even more. Tomorrow, I would meet Elena Vasquez and take the first step toward rewriting my own story. The Earth Cafe in Beverly Hills buzzed with the usual mixture of industry professionals, aspiring actors and tourists hoping to spot celebrities. But Elena Vasquez was exactly as I had imagined her, a woman in her mid-40s with intelligent brown eyes and hands that bore the calluses of someone who worked behind cameras rather than in front of them. When she saw me approaching her corner table, her smile was warm and genuine, without a trace of the pity I had grown to dread from well-meaning strangers. "Thank you so much for coming," she said as I settled nervously into the chair across from her, my hands trembling slightly as I tried to appear more confident than I felt. "I honestly wasn't sure you would, given everything you've been dealing with." "I wasn't sure I would either," I admitted, glancing around the bustling cafe and wondering if anyone would recognize me from the viral video that had made me infamous. "I don't really understand what's happening to me right now. 3 weeks ago, I was completely invisible to the world. Now I'm a hashtag that everyone has an opinion about." Elena signaled the waitress and ordered us coffee before turning her full attention back to me, studying my face with the careful observation of someone trained to read stories in the lines around people's eyes, the set of their shoulders, the way they held their hands when they thought no one was watching. "What's happening to you," she said thoughtfully, "is that you've become an unwitting symbol of something much larger than one night's humiliation. You represent how we treat service workers in this country, the casual cruelty that people with power feel entitled to exercise, the internet's ability to amplify both tremendous kindness and devastating hatred. But underneath all of that symbolism and social media noise, you're still just Sarah Chen, and I'd very much like to know who she really is." For the next 3 hours, I found myself talking more openly than I had in years, maybe decades. Something about Elena's respectful attention and genuine curiosity made it safe to share parts of my story that I had never told anyone except my mother. I told her about my father's death from a heart attack when I was 16, about working 3 jobs in college to pay for both my education and my mother's expenses, about the dreams of becoming a teacher that I had gradually set aside as financial realities took precedence over personal ambitions. I explained the peculiar psychology of service work, how customers looked through you as if you were transparent furniture, how a single kind word from a stranger could brighten your entire week while casual rudeness could destroy your day. I described the exhausting emotional labor of maintaining a pleasant demeanor while being treated as less than human. The way you learn to swallow your pride and accept disrespect because your livelihood depended on it. The thing is, I said, stirring my fourth cup of coffee as the afternoon sun slanted through the cafe windows, I don't want to be a victim. I don't want to be the poor woman everyone feels sorry for, the cautionary tale about celebrity cruelty. But I also can't pretend that what happened didn't devastate me, or that it didn't cost me my job and my financial security, or that it doesn't represent something truly ugly about how we treat each other in this society. Elena leaned forward, her expression growing more intense as she seemed to see something in my words that I hadn't fully recognized myself. What if you could change that conversation entirely? What if instead of being the woman who got humiliated at the Oscars, you could become the woman who refused to let that humiliation define her future? What if your story could help other people who've been made to feel invisible or worthless by those who should know better? How would that work exactly? I asked, genuinely curious, but also deeply skeptical about my ability to influence anything beyond my own small corner of the world. I'd like to make a documentary about your experience, Elena explained. Her words measured and thoughtful, but not just about you, about dignity in all kinds of work, about how we treat the people who serve us, about what happens when someone with a platform chooses to punch down instead of lifting others up. It wouldn't be a pity party or a revenge fantasy against Brandon Mitchell. It would be an honest, nuanced look at who you are, where you came from, and where you're choosing to go next. The idea terrified me on multiple levels. More exposure meant more judgment, more opportunities for people to dissect my life and find me wanting, more chances for the cruelty to resurface and multiply. But there was something deeply appealing about the possibility of taking control of my own narrative, of being more than a 30-second clip of humiliation endlessly replaying across social media platforms. What would you need from me? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Just your truth, Elena replied simply. Your real story, not the sanitized version that makes you look perfect or the tragic version that reduces you to victimhood. The messy, complicated, beautifully human truth about what it means to be seen as less than, and what it takes to reclaim your sense of worth in a world that profits from making people feel small. That evening, I called Marcus Rodriguez, my former supervisor who had become an unexpected source of wisdom and support since that awful Oscar night. He listened patiently as I explained Elena's proposal, her vision for the documentary, and my conflicted feelings about potentially putting myself in the public eye even more than I already was. You know what I think? He said after a long pause, his voice carrying the weight of his decades in the service industry. I think you've been hiding long enough. Not because you should be ashamed. You have absolutely nothing to be ashamed of. But because the world has made you feel like you should be invisible. Maybe it's time to show them who you really are instead of letting them decide for you based on one privileged asshole's opinion. The filming process, which began 3 weeks later, took 6 months and fundamentally changed everything about how I saw myself and my place in the world. Elena's small but dedicated crew, just herself, a cinematographer named David, and a sound engineer called Maria, followed me as I slowly rebuilt my life from the ground up, capturing both the mundane daily struggles and the unexpected moments of grace that emerged from my newfound visibility. We filmed at a downtown women's shelter where I had begun volunteering, initially just to fill the empty hours of unemployment, but gradually discovering a calling I never knew I possessed. Many of the women there carried their own stories of public shame. Domestic abuse survivors whose partners had used social media to humiliate them. Former addicts whose recovery struggles had been exploited by reality television. Immigrants whose accents and customs had made them targets for viral mockery. Maria Santos, a woman roughly my age who had lost her position as a bank manager when her ex-husband's very public arrest for embezzlement made her unemployable by association, became one of my closest friends and most important teachers. People love to kick you when you're down, she told me during one of our filmed conversations, because it makes them feel safe from that same fate. Like if you somehow deserved what happened to you, then they're protected from experiencing it themselves. But the truth is that any of us can fall from grace in 30 seconds. The only question that really matters is whether we choose to get back up. Working with these women taught me something that Elena's cameras captured beautifully, but that I had to learn experientially, that my humiliation, while genuinely painful, was also a form of privilege. I had fallen from invisibility rather than from great heights. I had been embarrassed rather than endangered. My path back to dignity was steep and challenging, but it was navigable, and I wasn't walking it alone. The job search proved to be a brutal education in how viral infamy affects employability. My name was still associated with the Oscar incident, and many potential employers in the service industry saw me as a liability who might attract unwanted attention or negative publicity. But slowly, opportunities began emerging from unexpected directions that had nothing to do with my previous experience in catering. A small restaurant owned by a family of Ethiopian immigrants offered me part-time work, specifically because they understood what it meant to be judged and found wanting by people who had never walked in their shoes. A community college reached out about developing a workshop series on hospitality management, wanting someone who understood the industry from the worker's perspective rather than just the management side. Most surprisingly, speaking requests started arriving from labor organizations, women's groups, and service industry conferences. The first time I stood at a podium looking out at an audience of hotel workers in Las Vegas, my hands shook with the same terror I had felt on that Oscar night. But this time, the trembling came from anticipation rather than humiliation, from the possibility of connection rather than the certainty of rejection. I'm not here because I'm special or because I have all the answers, I began, my voice barely above a whisper, but gradually growing stronger as I saw recognition in the faces before me. I'm here because what happened to me happens to millions of people every day, just usually without cameras rolling and social media amplifying the moment. I'm here because invisible doesn't have to mean worthless. And dignity isn't something that anyone else can take away from you. It's something you choose to maintain regardless of how others choose to treat you. The applause that followed wasn't polite or pitying, it was recognition. The sound of people who understood the weight of other people's assumptions, the exhaustion of constantly proving your humanity to those who would rather not acknowledge it. These were workers who had been yelled at by guests having bad days, who had cleaned up messes, both literal and metaphorical, without complaint, who had maintained professionalism in the face of casual cruelty and systematic disrespect. After my speech, a young housekeeper named Carmen approached me with tears in her eyes. Last month, a guest called me stupid and lazy because I couldn't speak English perfectly, she told me. I have 2 college degrees from my country, but here I clean toilets because my credentials don't transfer and I need to feed my children. Seeing you stand up here and talk about dignity, it reminds me that I'm still a person with value, no matter what anyone says about my accent or my job. These interactions became the emotional core of Elena's documentary, showing how workplace dignity affected real people in profound ways. We interviewed janitors who had PhD degrees from their home countries, fast food workers putting themselves through nursing school, retail employees who were published poets and accomplished musicians. The common thread wasn't educational background or artistic talent. It was the universal human need to be seen and respected for who you are, rather than judged solely by what you do for money. Meanwhile, Brandon Mitchell's career was experiencing its own dramatic transformation, though in precisely the opposite direction from mine. The viral video had sparked a broader examination of his behavior, and other stories began emerging from people who had previously been too intimidated or powerless to speak out against Hollywood's golden boy. Makeup artist came forward with security footage showing Brandon screaming at her for 30 minutes over a minor mistake with his foundation shade, calling her worthless and incompetent while she apologized repeatedly and tried to fix the problem. An assistant shared emails documenting his increasingly erratic behavior, including being fired via text message for bringing him sparkling water with too many bubbles. A young actress revealed that he had publicly mocked her dress choice at a premiere, leading to a panic attack that required medical attention. None of these incidents alone would have ended his career. Hollywood had weathered far worse scandals from bigger stars. But together, They painted a picture of systematic cruelty and entitlement that audiences were finding increasingly unpalatable in an era of growing awareness about workplace harassment and abuse of power. His latest action film underperformed dramatically at the box office. Endorsement deals quietly disappeared. Award nominations that industry insiders had considered automatic failed to materialize. I felt no satisfaction or vindication in his professional downfall. If anything, watching his decline made me sad for the waste of talent and opportunity, the way someone with so much potential had chosen to use their platform for cruelty rather than kindness. But I was learning through therapy and the support of new friends that my healing didn't require his punishment. It required my own growth and the discovery of purpose beyond his actions. Elena's documentary premiered at the Sundance Film Festival exactly 10 months after that Oscar night, and watching it felt like seeing my life refracted through a prism. Familiar experiences transformed into something both deeply personal and universally resonant. She had titled it Invisible No More, and the film opened with the now infamous footage of my humiliation, before expanding into a much larger exploration of dignity, respect, and the hidden lives of service workers across America. The film wasn't really about me, despite my story serving as the central narrative thread. Elena had woven together interviews with dozens of workers across industries, housekeepers who cleaned up after people who never learned their names, security guards who protected buildings full of employees who looked through them like furniture, food service staff who nourished bodies while their own worth went unrecognized and uncompensated fairly. But the most powerful segment featured my mother, who had agreed to be interviewed despite her initial reluctance to appear on camera. Sitting in her small living room with her walker positioned beside her favorite chair, she spoke with quiet dignity about raising a daughter alone, about the pride she felt in my work ethic and character, about the way multiple sclerosis had taught her that true strength comes from continuing to love and hope even when your body fails you. Sarah has always been someone who sees the dignity in every person she meets, my mother said, her voice steady despite the tremor that MS had introduced. What that man said about her on television, it revealed nothing about her character and everything about his. My daughter is not old or fat or any of the cruel words he used. She is kind, hardworking, intelligent, and beautiful. And anyone who can't see that has something wrong with their vision, not with her. The film's climax wasn't my humiliation or even my recovery. It was a scene filmed at the women's shelter where I now worked full-time as a counselor and advocate. Elena captured me, facilitating a support group for women who had experienced public shaming, helping them process their trauma and develop strategies for rebuilding their sense of self-worth. Every job has dignity, I said in the film's closing moments, surrounded by women who had become my chosen family, my teachers, my inspiration for continuing to fight for a more compassionate world. Every person deserves respect. What happened to me on that Oscar night wasn't really about champagne or clumsiness or even celebrity cruelty. It was about whether we choose to see each other's full humanity or turn away from it because it's easier to judge than to understand. The camera pulled back slowly to show the circle of women, survivors like me, rebuilding their lives one courageous day at a time, refusing to let other people's cruelty define their futures or limit their possibilities. I can't control what Brandon Mitchell chose that night, I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. But I can control what I choose now, how I respond to his cruelty, how I use this experience to help others who've faced similar attacks on their dignity. I choose to be seen, I choose to matter, and I choose to help others remember that they matter too, regardless of what anyone else might say about them. The screen faded to black, but for me, the story was just beginning. The phone call that would change everything came on a Tuesday morning exactly 1 year after that life-altering Oscar night. I was at the shelter, sitting in my small office and helping Linda Martinez practice for a job interview at a local medical clinic, when my assistant knocked on the door with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, somewhere between surprise and apprehension. "Sarah, there's someone on the phone for you." "Says it's urgent and important," Maya announced, holding the receiver like it might bite her. "It's someone from a talent agency in Hollywood." My first thought was that this had to be some kind of prank or scam. Why would a Hollywood talent agency be calling me at a women's shelter in downtown Los Angeles? I had deliberately distanced myself from the entertainment industry after the documentary's success, choosing instead to focus on advocacy work and direct service to women recovering from trauma. The voice on the other end was professionally polite but carried an undertone of nervousness that suggested this wasn't a routine call. Ms. Chen, this is Amanda Wells from Creative Artists Agency. I'm calling on behalf of Brandon Mitchell. He has specifically requested that I reach out to you about the possibility of a private meeting, if you would be willing to consider it. My immediate instinct was to hang up the phone. The documentary had won 3 Emmy nominations and sparked nationwide conversations about workplace dignity, celebrity accountability, and the treatment of service workers. I had testified before congressional committees about labor rights, spoken at universities across the country about resilience and recovery, and founded a nonprofit organization that provided job training and emotional support for people recovering from public humiliation and workplace trauma. My life had found new purpose, new meaning, new directions that I never could have imagined during those dark days immediately following my viral humiliation. Why would I want to voluntarily revisit the moment that had nearly destroyed me? What could Brandon Mitchell possibly have to say that would be worth reopening those carefully healed wounds? But something in Amanda's voice, a hesitation, perhaps even shame, made me pause before responding. What exactly does he want to discuss? He didn't provide me with specific details, she replied carefully. But he specifically requested that I make it clear to you that this isn't about publicity or image rehabilitation for his career. He said he needs to apologize properly, and he understands completely if you're not interested in hearing what he has to say. There would be no cameras, no media, no public statements, just a private conversation between 2 people. That evening, I called Elena Vasquez, who had become not just my documentary collaborator, but one of my closest friends and most trusted advisors. She listened thoughtfully as I explained the unusual request, my confusion about how to respond, and my conflicted feelings about potentially facing the man who had caused me so much pain. "What does your gut instinct tell you?" she asked after I finished explaining the situation. "Honestly, part of me wants to tell him to go straight to hell and never contact me again," I admitted. But another part of me is genuinely curious about what he might have learned in the past year. I've spent this time helping other people heal from public humiliation, and I've discovered that sometimes the person who hurt you is carrying their own wounds that contributed to their cruelty. That doesn't excuse what they did, but it might explain the psychology behind it. "Whatever you decide, you have my complete support," Elena assured me. "But remember, you don't owe him anything. Not forgiveness, not a meeting, not even acknowledgement of his existence. You've already done the hard work of rebuilding your life and finding meaning in your experience. This is entirely about what you want and need, not about what he might want or need from you." After days of consideration and consultation with my therapist, I agreed to meet Brandon at a small, quiet coffee shop in Silver Lake, far from the Hollywood haunts where paparazzi might be lurking, and far from the places where either of us might be recognized by fans or industry insiders. When I arrived at the appointed time, he was already there, sitting in a corner booth with his baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses on, despite being indoors. For the first time since that Oscar night, he looked smaller than I remembered, diminished somehow, like a regular person rather than the larger-than-life screen presence that had dominated box offices for years. When he saw me approach, he stood up with visible nervousness, his hands shaking slightly as he gestured toward the seat across from him. "Thank you so much for coming," he said, his voice lacking the theatrical confidence and casual arrogance I remembered from our previous encounter. "I honestly wasn't sure you would agree to see me." "I wasn't sure I would either," I replied, settling into the booth and studying his face with curious detachment. Up close, he looked older and more worn than his publicity photos suggested. The past year had clearly not been kind to him either, and I found myself wondering what his journey had looked like from his perspective. For several long minutes, we sat in uncomfortable silence, the weight of our shared history hanging in the air like smoke. Then he slowly removed his sunglasses, And I was genuinely surprised to see something in his eyes that I hadn't expected, what appeared to be genuine remorse rather than calculated. "Performance, I've watched your documentary 17 times," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've read every interview you've given, watched every speech you've made, followed your advocacy work from a distance. I've tried to understand how I became the kind of person who could do what I did to you that night. How I could have been so casually cruel to someone who was just trying to do her job." I didn't respond immediately, recognizing that this conversation needed to unfold at his pace rather than mine. This wasn't about making him feel better or absolving his guilt. If he had something important to say, he needed to find the courage to say it without prompting or assistance from me. "I was high that night," he continued, his voice growing even quieter. "Cocaine specifically. I'd been using heavily for months, trying to deal with my own insecurities and professional failures by tearing other people down. That night at the Oscars, I was already paranoid, aggressive, looking for someone to take my anger and frustration out on. When you fell and scattered those glasses, I saw an opportunity to feel superior to someone, anyone, even if it meant destroying an innocent person for my own temporary amusement." He paused, his hands clenched into fists on the table surface. "But I want to be absolutely clear. That's not an excuse for my behavior. Being high doesn't make you cruel. It just removes the filter that normally stops you from showing who you really are underneath all the public relations and media training. And underneath all my success and fame, I was apparently someone capable of destroying another human being for sport." I felt something shift in my chest. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a recognition of shared humanity that surprised me. "Why are you telling me this now? What do you hope to accomplish with this conversation? Because you deserved better treatment then, and you deserve an honest, complete apology now," he replied without hesitation. "Because I've spent this entire year in intensive therapy, trying to understand the damage I've done, not just to you, but to everyone I've hurt over the years with my entitlement and cruelty. Because I got sober 6 months ago, and part of that recovery process involves making genuine amends to the people I've harmed, even if they choose not to accept those amends." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a sealed envelope, setting it carefully on the table between us. "I know this can't undo what I did or erase the damage I caused to your life, but I want to make a substantial donation to your nonprofit organization. It's not hush money or a publicity stunt. I don't want any public credit for the contribution. I just want to support the important work you're doing to help people who've been hurt in the same way I hurt you." I took the envelope but didn't open it immediately, keeping my eyes focused on his face instead. "You understand that this doesn't fix anything, right? You can't apologize your way out of the consequences of your actions or expect forgiveness just because you've gotten sober and found therapy." "I understand that completely," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I've lost most of my career, most of my so-called friends, most of my self-respect, and all of my illusions about who I thought I was. I'm not here because I expect forgiveness or because I think we can somehow become friends. I'm here because you're a human being who deserved basic decency and respect, and I failed catastrophically to give you that. I'm here because saying I'm sorry is literally the least I can do, even though I know it's nowhere near enough." We talked for another 2 hours, and I found myself surprised by the depth of his self-reflection and genuine remorse. He told me about his childhood as the overlooked middle child of successful parents, about feeling inadequate despite his professional achievements, about using drugs and cruelty to mask his own deep-seated insecurities about his worth as a person. I shared stories about the women I worked with at the shelter, about how public humiliation affects people's ability to find employment, housing, and stability, about the long-term psychological damage that casual cruelty can inflict on its targets. "The hardest part for me," I explained, "wasn't even the initial humiliation itself, as terrible as that was. It was how your words made me doubt my own worth for months afterward. Every time I looked in the mirror, I heard your voice calling me old and fat and worthless. It took extensive therapy and the support of incredible people to remember that your opinion of me doesn't define my value as a human being." When we finally parted ways that afternoon, there was no dramatic reconciliation or cinematic moment of forgiveness. But there was something else, a sense of completion, of having faced the monster that had once loomed so large in my nightmares and discovering that he was human-sized after all, capable of growth and change just like everyone else. The donation turned out to be substantial enough to fund our job training and counseling programs for 2 full years, allowing us to expand our services to 3 additional cities and help hundreds more women rebuild their lives after experiencing public humiliation or workplace trauma. I didn't publicize Brandon's contribution, but I did accept it, understanding that healing sometimes comes through unexpected channels and that even imperfect people can contribute to important work. 2 months later, I received an invitation that literally took my breath away. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences wanted me to present an award at the upcoming Oscar ceremony, specifically the award for Best Documentary Feature. The irony was almost too perfect to believe. Returning to the scene of my greatest humiliation not as an invisible servant, but as an honored guest. Not as someone to be ignored, but as someone whose voice and perspective were valued. My first instinct was to decline immediately. The memories were still too fresh, the associations too painful, the risk of triggering my own trauma too high. But then I thought about all the women at the shelter who had told me that seeing someone like them succeed against overwhelming odds gave them hope for their own futures. I thought about the service workers across the country who had reached out to thank me for making their struggles visible and their dignity undeniable. Most importantly, I thought about my mother, whose health had stabilized enough with her new treatments that she would be able to attend the ceremony as my guest. The night of the ceremony, I stood backstage in a borrowed designer gown that fit me perfectly, not because I had lost weight to conform to Hollywood standards, but because the designer had specifically created it to celebrate my body exactly as it was. My hands trembled with the same nervous energy I had felt carrying champagne trays. But this time, the trembling came from anticipation and possibility rather than fear and subservience. When they called my name, I walked onto the same stage where Brandon Mitchell had once performed his cruelty for the entertainment of Hollywood's elite. The audience, many of the same people who had witnessed my humiliation just 2 years earlier, rose in a thunderous standing ovation that lasted so long I had to wipe away tears of joy and vindication. 2 years ago, I began when the applause finally died down, my voice strong and clear in the acoustically perfect theater. I stood in this building as someone the world didn't see. Tonight, I stand here as someone who refuses to be invisible ever again. This award recognizes documentaries that illuminate truth and challenge audiences to see the world differently. And I've learned that the most important truth is this: every person has inherent worth, every job has dignity, and every voice deserves to be heard and respected. I presented the award to a documentary about migrant farm workers whose stories echoed my own themes of invisible labor, economic exploitation, and the fundamental human need for dignity. As I handed over the golden statue, I caught sight of my mother in the audience, her face radiant with pride, despite the walker positioned beside her chair, her eyes bright with tears of joy for how far we had both traveled from that terrible night. After the ceremony, reporters inevitably asked whether I had forgiven Brandon Mitchell for his cruelty. I thought carefully before answering, wanting to give a response that honored both my own journey and the complexity of forgiveness itself. Forgiveness isn't something you give to someone else as a gift, I said, choosing my words with deliberate precision. It's something you give to yourself as a form of liberation from the power that their actions have over your life. I've forgiven myself for believing, even briefly, that his cruel words defined my worth as a human being. I've forgiven myself for staying invisible for so long when I had important things to say and contribute. As for him, he's doing his own work of accountability and growth, and that's between him and the people he's hurt. My job is to keep moving forward, to keep helping others remember their own inherent worth, and to never let anyone make me feel invisible again. The cameras captured my words for the evening news and entertainment shows, but they couldn't capture the internal journey that had brought me to this moment. The nights spent crying on my kitchen floor, the slow and often painful rebuilding of self-worth, the discovery that my greatest humiliation could become the foundation for my most meaningful work. As I left the theater that night, walking the same red carpet where I had once knelt gathering broken glass while tears of shame streamed down my face, I thought about the women at the shelter who would watch this broadcast and see themselves reflected in my unlikely success story. I thought about service workers across the country who would go to work tomorrow standing a little taller because someone like them had made it from the Oscar disaster to the Oscar stage. Most of all, I thought about the girl I used to be, the invisible waitress who believed that her value was determined by other people's opinions, who thought that one moment of public humiliation might define the rest of her life. She couldn't have imagined that her worst night would become the catalyst for her best life, that falling down in front of the world would teach her how to stand up for herself and others with a strength she never knew she possessed. The limousine carried me through the glittering Los Angeles night toward whatever came next in this unexpected life I was still learning to navigate. In my purse was a speech I had written but never delivered, words I had composed for myself during the darkest days of my recovery. To everyone who has ever been made to feel small, worthless, or invisible by those who should know better, you matter more than you know. Your work matters, regardless of how others perceive it. Your dignity is inherent and cannot be taken away by anyone else's cruelty or ignorance. No one, no matter how famous, powerful, wealthy, or cruel, has the right to diminish your sense of worth. Stand up when you can, speak out when it's safe, be seen when it's possible. The world desperately needs your voice, your perspective, your unique contribution to the human story. Don't let anyone convince you to stay invisible when you were born to shine as brightly as you choose. Tomorrow, I would return to the shelter, to the women who had become my chosen family, to the work that gave my life meaning and purpose beyond anything I could have imagined during my years of invisibility. But tonight, I allowed myself to savor this moment of triumph, the sound of genuine applause still ringing in my ears, the weight of possibility and purpose heavy in my chest, the profound knowledge that sometimes the worst thing that happens to you really can become the door to the best thing that could happen to you. You just have to be brave enough to walk through that door when it finally appears. If this story touched you, subscribe to our channel and leave your like so you don't miss any of our stories.